Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reiki Women Podcast. My name is Carrie Varela with the Reiki Healing Society, and it's always wonderful to have these one-on-one conversations. Today, I'm going to be talking with Bronwen Logan of Reiki with Bronwen. And unfortunately, our other friend and colleague, Michaela Daystar, her kiddo is sick, and so she can't join us today. So we'll send some good healing vibes to her daughter. Bronwen and I wanted to chat about living the Reiki Precepts. And the Reiki Precepts really sit at the heart of traditional Reiki, sit at the heart of the practice of Reiki and the state that Reiki really invites us into. And this isn't the only time we've talked about the Reiki Precepts. In fact, we talk about them almost in every episode of the Reiki Women Podcast to some degree. But we also broke down the Reiki Precepts quite a bit in one of our first episodes of the Reiki Women Podcast. And in my experience, it's like sometimes the first few episodes, or the first few times you do something, they're a little bit raw and rough, but actually very potent and powerful. And I look fondly back at that episode of where we talked in depth about the Reiki Precepts. So I invite you to check out that episode as well if this topic interests you. But today we want to talk a little different spin on the Reiki Precepts and talk about how we can bring them into our daily life, how we can live the essence of the Reiki Precepts, and maybe a little bit more about what they're inviting us into within the practice of Reiki. So Bronwen, I'd love to hand it over to you. Will you tell us more about how you live the Reiki Precepts?
Yeah, so I wish I could remember what we spoke about in that early episode. I'll have to go and watch it again, right? Yeah, it's a while ago now. So I guess the first place to begin is, what are the Reiki Precepts? And I'm sure most of you know what they are, but it's always good to reiterate them. And also, I think sometimes people feel a little insecure about them because there are different translations. And so that can be a little confusing, which is fine. I think, if we're translating from another language, there's obviously going to be different versions, translations, and it's nice to be flexible. So, there's some that I work with more, but sometimes I, think of things slightly differently as well, just to, trying to fit it to a certain situation. And so if we just look at what the precepts actually are, they begin with "for today only," or in another version of that is "just for today." So it doesn't matter how you say that, what words you're using. For today only, I will not anger, or do not anger, do not worry, be grateful, yeah, and sometimes that's be humble. Then there's what I learned initially was be honest in your work, which, over the years we've sort of shifted into slightly different versions of that, of be true to your way, be true to your practice, be diligent. So there's a number of different ways you can see that. And then finally, we have be compassionate to yourself and others. Now, we could look at, all the Japanese for that and do direct translations, but translating directly is sometimes less efficient, I find, because it takes us outside of how we would actually use a precept, because we need to actually have it as a living thing. And that's what we're talking about today. So living the precept. So how do they actually sit in our lives, and how do they work, and how might we use them? So I would use those precepts according to what we're talking about here, which is the system of Reiki. So they belong as one of the main elements of the system of Reiki. When we look at these elements within the system of Reiki, we think of them as existing to support us and to help us be Reiki. So we've got two different things there. So we've got Reiki as spiritual energy, and then we've got the system of Reiki with the different elements. So Reiki, spiritual energy, exists everywhere. We are in it. It is in us. And then we have the system of Reiki. So we have these different elements, and the precepts are one of those. So it is the precepts. If we were to live the precepts, then we would be Reiki. Yeah. So we would be spiritual energy completely without any boundaries or holding on to anything. We would be free to be ourselves, our true selves in this very moment, without anger, without worry, being truthful, basically, to who we totally are at this moment in this body as this being. And the other elements in the system of Reiki support us also in that, but they support us to be the Reiki precepts is probably the best way to see it. So we'll meditate or do techniques. We'll, what else do we do? We'll chant, or we'll, do hands-on healing. So we do these other elements. Receive Reiju. So we do these other elements to actually be the Reiki precepts in order to be Reiki. So it's a bit of a pathway, if you like. And I guess from that, I would say that living the Reiki precepts is what I was saying before, is being Reiki, is actually being this being that is not restricted, not holding on to things, that is truly someone who is in this moment and free of fear and angst and worry. So that's sort of like I guess the foundation idea behind why we would practice, what they are, and why we would want to live them, or the beginning of that conversation, Carrie.
I love that. And I love starting with, creating a foundation of like shared knowledge so we can have a meaningful conversation, right, about them. And I think that that's a beautiful a segue, into living the precepts. And for me, I think one of the things that's really helped me understand the precepts a little bit more is where they come from as well. So the founder of Reiki was a Shingon Buddhist practitioner. And he was practicing some other different esoteric Buddhist kind of subsects, at the time for the majority of his life. And my understanding is that the precepts come from the Mikyo Buddhist tradition, and that within Mikyo, there is kind of a conversation, a dialogue around creating a perfect teaching, or, putting a simple teaching together in the right order, the right structure, in the right way. And then that teaching is like a practice, right, that you come back to again and again and again. And ultimately, the aim of that is, to live a better life, to embody the principles that they contain. And I think within the context of Reiki too, is to understand that there's many different layers of meaning and much wisdom, wisdom inside of the precepts. So even the outer words that come, there's, a questioning that all of us as practitioners of Reiki should explore is, well, why not anger? What does it mean to, what does anger do for me? What doesn't it do for me? And why should I bring my focus and awareness particularly into that emotion out of all of the emotions that we feel? And we've talked about it, and you've talked about this before, Bronwen, and think of anger as something that, it's very destructive. It overtakes our inner world and in our awareness. So, just picking out that one precept, there's different layers of why it is that we should explore or sit with and be with. Really a doctrine, right, around not angering. And for me, all of the Reiki precepts, it's about right relationship with them as well. So, I see a lot within Reiki groups, and your kitty.
He's having a morning. She's having a morning.
She's ready. I see a lot within Reiki groups and people who, have trained in Reiki, and they said, "Oh, I can't control the anger I'm feeling." And so does that mean I'm bad at Reiki? Does that mean I suck at Reiki? Does that mean I'm not good enough? And no, I want to say no always to those people, because it's about being more aware actually of how much this emotion can rule our life and rule our inner world, rule how we react to the world around us, and invites us into like transforming and redirecting that emotion ultimately. And that's what Reiki does. I think you talked about how we do the Reiki precepts, and by doing them, we begin to live them. And by living them, we get to be Reiki. But think of it this way, after a Reiki treatment, more than likely you'll be more grounded in the present moment. More than likely, you'll feel more liberated from anger and worry. More than likely, after a Reiki treatment, you'll be feeling grateful, humble, perhaps. You might feel more focus and power to be connected to what is your work, or to work hard either on yourself or whatever it is that you're working on in the context of healing. And you'll more than likely be compassionate to yourself as well in that process. So like the words of the precepts are really guiding us and directing us into the experience of Reiki. So, in a day-to-day living, for me, I learned this from you, Bronwen, living the Reiki precepts is not to deny the emotions that I'm feeling, but rather gives me a route with which to process and transform them. And I think when I was studying with you, Bronwen, we talked about this whole notion of do not anger as an opportunity every day to look at our anger, to really just look at it, notice it, not react to it, but be with our anger, one's anger, and sit with it in such a way that you begin to unpack it. You begin to look more closely and clearly as to where it's coming from. And hopefully in that context too, begin to release that emotion. And that can take work. That's not necessarily easy to do in any given moment. Might require forgiveness practice. It might require to acknowledge pain and suffering. Might require us to actually look at ourselves more compassionately. But those are kind of the steps that I go through. And every time I mull through the Reiki precepts, I trust that it's leaning me and taking me more closely in the direction of Reiki. And it's also like kind of these bumpers that are helping me guide my life. So when I first heard the Reiki precepts from my first Reiki teacher, I thought of it as words I could live by. And my kind of spiel about living the precepts, and just a little bit of a snapshot on how I bring them into my spiritual awareness. But ultimately, they're words that I live by, right? And I've made that as a conscious choice. So when my first Reiki teacher told me about the Reiki precepts, I thought of them as like, I immediately thought, oh, those are beautiful words to live by. And that thought has really carried with me to the present day. But it's a conscious choice, right? It's like, I don't know about you, Bronwen, but I get inundated with positive messages. I mean, whether it be like posts on social media or just because that's what I like to do. But, a positive message is one thing, but like living a more stricter practice is another. It gives us an opportunity to really go deep into those principles and to gain that wisdom that I believe those words are pointing us into.
Yeah. Look, I think positive messages are really helpful. I think that, we know that the research that they've done, that people who are always negative about things, that they are definitely less happy in their lives, they enjoy their lives less, and that affects their health. Their lives are often shorter because of that. So, and less quality of life in that. So focusing on the positive things is a great thing, and I think it is really helpful to us. The Reiki precepts, as you say, give us that at some degree, but then to actually live them is a totally different experience. And I think, when people think about the system of Reiki, and this is something that I think is a challenge to us with this podcast, and possibly in our own practices, the ideas around what is the system of Reiki. A lot of people have different ideas about this. And to me, the system of Reiki is, it's not about what I feel, right? It's about how I feel. And you said that's perfectly before when you said at the end of a treatment, how do you feel? So how are you living your life? What is happening in life? Not like, oh, when I'm doing a treatment, I feel, this and this happening, or I had this message, or whatever people might think or say. That's not the system of Reiki. Living the system of Reiki. I know we're talking about living the precepts, but the precepts are ultimately, or the other way around, the system of Reiki is ultimately the precepts. That's what it all comes down to. And if we live that, then it's about how we're living our life. So how are we feeling as we live our life? What's happening to us in each moment? And how are we responding in each moment? And are we aware of what we're doing? So yes, we might get angry. I got angry at my dog yesterday, and he just kept barking and barking in a small space in my ear. And there was a moment where I snapped, and I just felt this anger. And I thought, God, I haven't felt that for a long time. And it was so immediate, and so, that it was just pure anger. Like, I didn't do anything with it. It was nothing. It just flared up. And I thought that's such an interesting experience, because it reminds you of why anger is a bad thing. It is, as you said before, destructive. It is something without any boundaries, and it is something that just it could create. I yelled at the dog, and then I felt so bad later on, because what was I doing? And, I'm like, he'll never forgive me. And how do I make it up to him? And, there's all the regrets around actually experiencing that anger inside, and understanding, that is something that can happen to us. But how do we work with that? So, what is my answer to that? And looking for ways of understanding ourselves better. And that will come then through practices. So, for example, meditation practice. Yeah. So breathing into the hara and breathing out. What's happening there? I'm actually feeling like, as I do that practice, Joshin Kokyoho, I'm feeling like I'm more than this person. I am a part of everything. I'm actually experiencing that. So I am also that dog who was probably experiencing some form of frustration. Yeah. And I am all of that. So the more that I practice that technique, the more that I embody my experience of being the world and my understanding of the world, and have a much deeper empathy and compassion for myself, yeah, and for other beings. Just experiencing that is a teacher, is a lesson, and each lesson builds upon the other one, and it brings me more awareness of myself in this world. And the precepts are the like the little stories that are there that I can follow, that I can connect with, and check in on myself, and see how I am feeling or not feeling, and what, they give me segues into contemplation about myself.
Yeah, I love that contemplation about myself. So I was one of the ways, that my practice of the Reiki Precepts has expanded is, of course, being a mom and working with young kids, and juggling their emotions as well as my own. And my kid recently we were talking about being happy or angry, and she was like, "What's that? What's that? Anger? I kind of like that feeling though." I just honest answer from her. And I thought that that's really wise, actually, because some of us are also kind of addicted to it, right? It's addicted. So any little thing can be that anger trigger that brings up that emotion. And that's like when our inner garden, as a descriptor, a metaphor, is that like we've planted all these seeds of anger, and that's what's growing inside of us, right? That's the state of being that we're comfortable with. And so Reiki invites us into that emotional transformation, right? To work with those feelings. And it doesn't come naturally. I mean, sometimes it's just immediate. Like some people that I've trained in Reiki feel this almost immediate shift in their mood, how they feel about themselves, how in life, and that kind of emotional high, spiritual high might stick with them for a year, I mean, or longer, many months.
Yeah.
But then eventually, those old patterns really creep back in.
Yeah.
And so in that case, I think of the Reiki precepts as just this little process that I'm going through, and that compassion at the end of it is the ultimate destination.
Yeah.
That we're working towards. And so even if we can't get rid of our anger, even if we really can't loosen the grip of worry in our hearts and minds, that eventually, we can still practice the precepts by being compassionate to ourselves in that moment. And I know for myself, a lot of times, compassion is the thing that's really hard to access when I'm angry or afraid. But it's the thing that kind of can dispel the anger or fear as well. So I think the Reiki precepts, of course, are very wise, but I've been very intentional about choosing them as my practice. And just as a parallel, there's other systems out there, like the Bobo Ono. Is that how? I'm not sure if I'm describing it right, but it's the Hawaiian technique about forgiveness. I'm blinking on the whole thing, but that's like, it's a very similar idea, right? It's a principle that we come back to again and again and every day. And even though the words don't change, our own inner experience of them changes dynamically throughout the day.
I mean, it's interesting. When I started thinking about this just before the podcast, and I was thinking, it's these parallels between, like when we talk about living the precepts, it's like parallels between religion, right? And this. And I'm sure, I mean, I know you have a religious background, I have my own sort of weird religious background too. I mean, I think most of us sort of do to some degree. And just, every time I feel like it's going to hit that, and then I bounce back, because I don't want it to be a religion. And I certainly don't think of it as a religion, right? But, I think of like the commandments. And I know they're a different thing again, but, they're things that people use to I guess, to give some sort of, you use the word container to life, to keep themselves in check and to ensure that they're, doing the right thing, if you like. Yeah. And in one way, that I find the precepts, there is some sort of parallel to this, except I think for me, I find the precepts about me rather than about anyone else. And it's very much more possibly more a mental exercise at one level. And then having, as you know, as we were talking about, having that depth, so being able to go into them and find these, deeper meanings in there that affect our lives. So I just thought I just sort of often come up against that. I don't know if it comes to you.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I think there's kind of like a rub there. And it's sometimes too, when it's like, when I was growing up in a spiritual background and stuff, and I go to church and they take like one verse of the Bible, and then they just spend a whole, at church, whatever, a whole hour dissecting it and just, putting all this different meaning into it. And so sometimes that, like, when I feel like when I'm doing the similar thing with the Reiki precepts, it's a little bit of a trigger for me. But but the offset is, if I'm not practicing the precepts incorrectly, or if I'm not, if my anger gets the best of me, it's not like I'm going to go to hell.
Yeah.
It's about tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so, I think for me, well, I was talking to one of my Reiki clients the other day about that Reiki is so subtle and etheric and energetic that there's this lack of tangibility for her, and she was looking for more things that help it come home and ask for that tangibility. And so I think that that's what the Reiki precepts really help us do.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember the Hawaiian thing, but I'll think of it.
I don't know.
It's just a similar parallel. So, but here's the thing, is if you see something, a positive word somewhere, and you take it in for that day as kind of your medicine that helps you, be in touch with the world around you, be in touch with maybe what's happening inside of us, knowing that we are the universe. So I don't know how many times I thought, like, I'm going through something, and then I see like the answer somewhere kind of mirrored to me in the world around me. So that's always a lovely synchronicity. But it lacks that depth. So the Reiki precepts give us this more concrete foundational practice that we can return to.
Because they also link into each other, don't they? That whole thing of, they all sort of support each other in one way. So they are like a total little club that work together, and we can, even if we're just working with one of the precepts, the other ones tend to come in at some point. And that's a really it's a solid feeling, isn't it? It is we talk about it being the foundation of the practice, and having that as a foundation is just incredibly supportive and helps. I can't say how much it's helped me to be with other people and to experience empathy for other people and the things that they go through, largely because it's about myself, weirdly enough, right? So it's about me and my world, and just knowing that I guess a deeper understanding of yourself, of myself, helps to know that there is this linking into other people, and that other people, whatever they're, going through, there's something that I don't know, it gives me ways to connect into other people's experiences, I guess, and to not judge them, and to know that we are all perfectly imperfect.
Yeah, I think another way that I often talk about this with other people is, I as an intro, is like, how much of your time do you want to spend lost in worry? particular.
Yeah.
And that always really resonates with whoever I'm talking with, because they'll usually see the spark go off for them and they're like, I spend a lot. I mean, I have the precepts as been a guiding light for me for the last 15 years or so, but nevertheless, like, I spend a good majority of my day-to-day living still in worry in particular. That's always my problem one. I worry about this, worry about that. And even when I'm with other people, worrying how I'm relating to them, worrying about their experience, worrying if they're getting enough out of it, if in the context of like giving a Reiki treatment or whatever. So I know that whenever my mind is in kind of locked in that fight or flight mode, I can't be genuine with people. Like, I can't really take down
Yeah.
those walls around me that allow me to just be myself, allow me to be the light of my true self.
Yeah.
To the people
Yeah.
around me. And that's what creates powerful transformation. That's what creates powerful connection. It moves through those barriers to intimacy, and suddenly we can just be together, right? And feel like we're holding each other's hands in the darkness of our experiences, and just being there for each other,
Yeah.
and not necessarily needing to fix somebody, but to know that as I offer these teachings to others, is that it has that power to help them live a better life. um,
Yeah.
and ultimately, swimming into that, to discuss, we get to find this kind of illustrious state, right, where we can just be ourselves, and not live so much trapped in fear. And I think that that's such a gift. And to me, that underlying teaching of that is to trust life, and to trust the process in life. And if we're just kind of constantly resisting it, fighting it, trying to make it this or that, we can't be in touch with what is happening now. And yeah, it's hard to, when we're constantly stuck in worry and fear, it's hard to see the beauty of life. And
Yeah.
so that's one of the things that the Reiki Precepts, I think, helps us attune ourselves to.
Worry is definitely it's something that I always say we use our energy to worry, and that energy is something that it's precious, and it's something that should be working in its own way, in a different way. And maybe that's that trust thing, right? But when we use that, when we throw that energy into worry, then we lose it, it's gone. And that's when we get sick, because whatever is meant to be naturally happening within us is not actually allowed to. And so we start to get illnesses, and because we're not feeding ourselves in the right way. Yeah, we're not supporting ourselves in the right way by throwing that I always say good energy, but good is sort of like, that sounds terribly judgmental, but what I'm just saying is, it should be here for us, and supporting us, and instead we're throwing it away into something that's futile and useless. So just sitting back and allowing ourselves to, as you said, I really like that you said trust, sitting into that trust of life, and really lets us let go and let everything flow much more easily, and do what it's meant to do.
I agree. And I think that also, brings us into more union and connection with the universe. If our mind is always fraught with something's going to happen to me, I'm worried about this, worried about all, there is no trusting of that organic experience of life unfolding as it should be. And that could just be a really rough place to live in. And my experience of working with that in my own life, I think ultimately comes down to a fear of death, and that is a fear of transformation, right? So, when we can work on loosening all of our worry, even down to our fear of death, we can start to live in a more of a harmony with life. And those who've healed themselves from really intense illnesses or had healing crises, usually, what you find on the other end is gratitude, appreciation for life, less time stuck in worry and anger, more time and appreciation for the present moment. And that's unfortunately and fortunately one of the things that a painful healing crisis can teach us. That's one of the beautiful things that can come out of that. And they're sitting there in the Reiki Precepts as well, for sure.
Yeah. I was thinking about your daughter and about her saying that she enjoyed that sort of feeling of anger, but you know what, she would also enjoy that feeling of love. And there
Exactly.
it's that parallel of feeling, isn't it? It's like when we really crack ourselves open and we feel, and how that is just such an intense and beautiful feeling. As you say, it can sometimes feel addictive, I guess, too, depending, but it's where we take that. And it's so it doesn't have to be anger. It could be love as well.
Absolutely. And I get that there's that, you don't want to say good or bad, but obviously we'd say, oh, love is good and anger's bad. But, it's to me, it's more of a positive negative. Love is a positive emotion. It brings more of that positivity into your life. If you put all of your energy into negative emotions, it just brings more of that into your life. And you get to decide. I mean, if you decide, oh, yeah, actually, I do want to spend my whole life lost in anger, you can do that. And if that's what makes you happy, I guess that's great, but, there's the whole kind of stream of negative effects of that, right? Of, being in a state of victim consciousness, the repercussions to other people in our lives. And so, we can say that probably something that you would want to liberate yourself from. Or what would it feel like? What would it feel like, just even in a moment in our life, to be liberated from that fully?
Yeah, I really feel like the precepts always help me and guide me to choose the light, if you like. Yeah, it's like that. It's like I'm always making that choice, trying to move into that space or be that space. And that is such a beautiful feeling. And that's why I said it's not like, Reiki's not what you feel, it's how you feel. How are you living your life? How does it feel to live life? And these are choices. We make them every moment. And the precepts are there to support us with that. There's something else about the precepts that I've probably said before, but it's something that I often think about is, they are this foundation, as we're talking about, right? So, they help us to live a life that is bright. And so we have that foundation, but then they're also the pinnacle of the system. So they're the foundation of the system. So they support the system, but they're also what we also work towards at the top of the system, which is really interesting. They sort of embody these two sort of different aspects. And we could probably find a lot of parallels, what that might mean, or analogies, if you like. So, that thing of that, to be, I don't know, to be me and also to be the universe, both things happening at the same time, sort of like the big and the small and anyway, I think that they just really are these perfect little guidelines. And you're talking about historically where they come from. I I mean, we've seen lots of different places where they possibly could come from, for sure, and it in Japan. And I think it really, that they just really expressed what it meant to live a good life in Japan at the time that the system of Reiki was developed, and that there were many people who were using ideas such as these, and they've come out of, as you said, Buddhism, but also Shintoism, and they've come out of these elements, and those practices themselves are also considered to be a way of life, as much as we probably consider the system of Reiki to be a way of life.
Well, I don't know if we have anything else. I mean, we have so much to say about this topic. We probably go on and on and on about it, but we would love to hear from our dear listeners how they've lived the precepts. What do you think about the precepts? Have you changed them into your own language to make them feel more in alignment for you? I know my students, sometimes they add little bits and pieces to them to just really round the corners for themselves. But we'd also just love to hear your experiences of working with the precepts. Have you encountered moments where you can't loosen the grip of where your anger, and how have you dealt with that in your own practice and life? Maybe share with us some of the gifts that the precepts have given you. And we hope that this episode is useful, informative, gives you some ways, just a little bit more depth to working with the precepts, just not necessarily right on that top level, first level, just reading them and doing it really rotely, but rather like living them, embodying them, finding again their use and meaning for you in your life. So we hope that was useful for you. So many blessings. Feel free to like, share, comment this episode with somebody that might appreciate it as well. And we'll see you again for another episode down the road.
Bye for now.